Namaskar and welcome to In Focus. When Indian Prime Ministers retire, they never write books about politics. P.V. Narasimha Rao has just broken that mold. Last week, his book, The Insider, was released by Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and as it says on the cover, it tells the explosive truth about Indian politics. Inside, it says it emerges from the hidden heart of Indian politics and tells a story that's compelling and often shocking. Today, in an exclusive interview to In Focus, Mr. Narasimha Rao discusses The Insider and the world of politics it describes. Mr. Rao, tell me something. If you are going to tell the explosive truth, why have you chosen to do it in a novel rather than in an autobiography or even in a study of politics?
Well, I think the kind of material which I was dealing with, it required the advantages of all the three methods. Partly autobiography, because without the authenticity of some incidents about which I could speak, the base would not have been strong enough. But if I make it a complete autobiography, I miss many things where I cannot say that I know this as a fact, I have seen this as a fact, I have passed through this. So it has to be something more than an autobiography, the biography of the country rather than an individual.
How close an approximation to real politics is this world?
Well, I can tell you that obviously the events described in the book are all real events. Wars with Pakistan, splits in the ruling party, and Jawaharlal Nehru, Lal Bahadur Shastri, Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, all these are original characters. There is no fictionalization about them.
People like Anand, Gopi Kishan, Ram Gopal, those are fictionalized.
These are fictionalized. These have certain reality, not necessarily in one person. I have made them synthetic in the sense that I have taken one trait from someone in some state I happen to know. I found that that trait could fit into some other person. So this is how.
But the situation they find themselves in, those are real type of situations.
That's right.
So although the characters are fictional, the situations the circumstances are real.
The circumstances are realistic. I wouldn't say that the circumstances is 100% real,
Realistic.
but it is based on a reality, and you cannot say that such a thing could not happen or doesn't happen.
That's
it
good
does
enough.
happen.
That's perfectly good enough for me. Let me put it like this, Mr. Rao. I've read the book. The world that emerges is a world of manipulation, self-seeking, conniving, cold-blooded calculation, sadly devoid of either ideology or even a sense of mission. Would you accept that?
You have all kinds of tricks played in an election. The result is that the most popular person does get elected in an indirect election. Like that, I have given a balanced picture. I didn't say that it is so bad that nothing good can come out of it.
But you opened our eyes to a side that up till now we didn't know about.
These things are not known to the general reader, generality of readers. They are very much known to politicians who are actually either dealing with these methods, dealing with these situations. Some of them are doing these things. Some of them are suffering as a result of these things being done to them.
You say politicians won't be surprised by the world you describe, but the outsider would be shocked.
Outsider who is not so much into politics, he only sees the newspaper stories and whatever he hears from people, etc.
For that outsider, in a sense, you've exposed a reality of politics he didn't know anything about.
Absolutely. I wanted that outsider to know what is happening. And it's not because I wanted to enlighten him and keep quiet there. I wanted him to realize that the system has been subjected to so much of corrosion, and if democracy has to succeed, apart from politicians, apart from ministers, apart from MLAs and MPs, who is to be properly educated, who is to fully understand the situation? It is the people.
And in opening the people's eyes
That's
to
right.
this reality of politics, you're also hoping that they'll put pressure to change it.
That's it. That's it. That is the utilitarian part of it. That's the most important part of it. And that is the result which I somehow expect from the interaction of the book and the people or its reader.
Let's come to the book itself. One of the insights you offer is the characterization of power in terms of what you call the Aurangzeb principle, that the essence of power is that it cannot be shared, that to attain it you have to usurp it. In a democracy, that's a very uncomfortable principle, isn't it?
Well, it is uncomfortable, but there are methods of doing it in the context of democracy, and that's what I described. It may not be the exact method Aurangzeb used. There are other methods of making the number one person ineffective, slowly ease him out and occupy his position. This is happening most of the time.
You do that
all
in
parties
fact,
it's happening.
You do that in this book in the case of Chief Minister Mahendranath when he gets replaced by Mr.
quite,
Chaudhary.
quite.
But again, the process you describe is one of skullduggery, mysterious goings-on in Delhi, intrigues involving newspapers and backstairs people. It's unsavory, isn't it?
Well, it's unsavory, but as I said, there are so many things which are not known to people. To them, it's a surprise and unsavory. To those who are actually part of it, or at least are observing it day in and day out in the system, it is unsavory to many of them. But if one is doing it deliberately for one's own benefit, what is unsavory to him?
Let me, from the point of view of an outsider, put this question to you. You're not exaggerating here. This is really how things happen.
I would say that there is a minimum amount of exaggeration. I mean, no writer can say that he is actually photographing an incident or event.
But the essence is exactly as it was.
I didn't have any motive of giving you what they call atiranjit, that is exaggerated picture, because I am there in the field. I am working for this last 60 years. What motive would I have in distorting what I am doing?
I accept that. Let me come to the sort of characters that you find in the book, many of whom are honestly repulsive people. There are the three contractors, there's Ram Gopal, there's Gopi Kishan, there's Shekhar.
Sure.
Are these people you created to provide color and relief, or are they really representative of the sort of people one meets?
No, I would be very callous if I had produced them only for color and effect. They are there. They are very much there.
So they're really typical of the sort of person as a politician you have to deal with.
Yes, sir.
Does one meet them occasionally, or does one meet them very
Well,
frequently?
I can't tell you a kind of census report on that, but the point is, such elements are there. I am afraid if their influence, their clout, their number is tending to go up. And that is what really makes me feel afraid of the future. And that's perhaps what pushed me to write this for whatever it is worth.
You want the Gopi Krishans and Shekhars weeded out?
Weeded out, controlled as far as possible. I mean, you may not say at any time there is no Shekhar and no Gopi Kishan at all. I mean, they were there before democracy. They were there in all times, all climes. But the point is, does this society and the state have a control over them?
At the moment, it doesn't.
Or is somebody sitting in Mumbai saying that such and such a secretary or such and such a minister is in my pocket?
And in raising this point, once again, you're attracting attention to something you hope public pressure and opinion
Absolutely.
will remove.
Yes, it has to remove, because there is no other thing. You don't remove such elements by putting them before a gun.
One of the characters who's perhaps the most repellent is Shekhar. He's a cabinet minister in the state of Afrozabad, yet he spends his entire time conniving, manipulating, without any policy, without any principle, to bring rivals down. Are
Well,
cabinet
in fact-
colleagues really like that?
Well, I have given him a motivation. I have given him a very serious motivation of illegitimacy being thrown in his face in spite of his brilliance, in spite of his success. He is not really treated as equal to others. This is something from Mahabharata days.
But what I really meant was that audiences will read this and say, are people in cabinets really like this? Or is Mr. Narasimha Rao exaggerating?
No, I am not exaggerating. I am not exaggerating. I can tell you, I have no reason to exaggerate and show my own colleagues wherever as such people. No, I have no such motivation at all. I have seen
this is reality.
This is a part of reality. Don't say this is reality. It's not the whole of reality.
Okay, as you say, it's a part of reality. Then let me put this to you, Mr. Rao. To the outsider, it's a very depressing and disillusioning part of reality.
Well, that is the shock that he has to get some time or the other. It won't disillusion him after he has gone deeper into this book and maybe reads another 10, 15 books of this nature.
You write without any overt judgment. In fact, you write with greater detachment. But you are the author of this world of politics. Do you like the world you're writing about? Or do you wish, whilst you accept it as reality, it was quite different?
You see, there is a part of your question is like asking, there is a mother who has a very ugly child. What does she do? What is the attitude of the mother to the child? That would be the attitude, my attitude to the book. But having said that, I would say this book has got a purpose. The purpose is to tell people that a systemic crisis is staring them in the face. They have not yet realized it. We are all not realizing it, but it is there. You are actually going on with the outward trappings of democracy. But the reality of the feudal era is still persisting, not always openly, but subterraneously it is persisting, and you are not able to go to the cause of it, to the root of it. Why? Because the programs that you have undertaken, you have not given the attention which they deserved. You fell into all kinds of other things connected with the chair, connected with power, today's power, tomorrow's power, who is to occupy the chair. These things have become much larger in their importance to the exclusion of the programs of transformation which the party, Mahatma Gandhi, everybody had enjoined you to concentrate.
You're saying, if I may put it slightly differently, that instead of being service, politics has become self-service.
An end in itself. An end in itself.
And that's why you find it depressing.
All the kursi jhagdas, see, how do you place your chair is being looked into. But what do you do after placing your chair and sitting in it? That thing is being forgotten because we never seem to settle in the chair.
You also said something else a moment ago. You said that all these things are getting worse as days go by.
Yeah, that I have seen because I have been in the field for so many years that I could make a comparison of 1950 to 1980 or 90.
My last question for this part, if things are getting worse, who's to blame? The people who come into politics or the system?
Now, I think that is an unprofitable kind of question. The question is, how are you going to put it right?
By bringing new people in?
Absolutely, that is one very good way of doing it. Go ahead and do it.
And the other way,
all for it.
And the other way is to courageously expose what you don't like about it.
That's right. That's right. If people don't know at all what is happening, then how would you motivate them to bring about a change?
That's why you've opened this
That's right.
can of worms to public exposure.
Yes.
This book is really essentially, in one sense, an expose, isn't it?
Yes,
With the best motive.
It is expose, there is no doubt about it. But whom I am exposing is the question. I am exposing the situation. I am not exposing X, Y, Z.
Absolutely. Mr. Rao, at that point, let's take a commercial break. I want to come back after the break and perhaps talk a little bit about some of the real people that feature in the book.
Okay.
We'll be back in just a couple of moments. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're talking to P.V. Narasimha Rao about his book, The Insider. Mr. Rao, I want in this part to talk about what the book says about the 4 prime ministers, the real people. You say that Indira Gandhi's thirst for absolute power was insatiable. At another point, you say she wanted all chief ministers to
I
be...
don't say that.
Anand, the hero, thinks it. Absolutely.
I have characters who say that. And in my own political life, I have seen people who have not only said it, but said it any number of times, and based their actions and their attitudes on this hypothesis.
That her thirst for power was
That's right.
insatiable. Anand also...
Anand says, if it is so, he doesn't say it is so.
No,
If it is so, why is it so?
And Anand also says, and I quote again, she wanted all chief ministers to be junior and therefore totally subservient to herself. These are thoughts that go through Anand's mind. They are dilemmas that he's troubled
Because
by.
he is hearing these things being said, you see. He wants to know which is the right thing, which is the right assessment on the basis of which he, Anand, has to act.
But in fact, he never comes to a solution, does he? He doesn't decide whether she wanted people to be subservient or
He
not.
has a very arbitrary kind of opinion about her. He thinks that she wants him as chief minister to implement the policies adumbrated, clearly promised in the manifesto. Now, whether she has told him or not, he has drawn this conclusion. And that is where he differs from the others, because they don't take that as true of the manifesto, some of them. He takes that true as the manifesto. He says, my prime minister, my leader could not have meant anything else except
And yet
this.
there were a lot of people, as Anand is aware, who were absolutely convinced
Yes, yes.
that she meant
That's right.
something else. In fact, Anand thinks at one point that she wants politicians, chief ministers, who are dwarfs, dwarfs in all ministries, dwarfs in all walks of life, so that they can be expunged at her will.
This is the idea which he gets from others. He is also weighing this idea.
The question that you raise as author through Anand's thinking is, was Indira Gandhi looking for power's sake, or did she have an end
That's
in
right.
mind?
That's right.
But the question is never answered. Anand avoids
that will
answering
be
it.
answered in the second volume. Indira Gandhi is only 1/3 over. The real difficulty, the real test of Indira Gandhi's leadership is coming later.
Okay, let me ask you. You're the author who raises the question. What way do you try and answer it yourself?
I don't know.
Don't know or won't tell.
Well, whatever it is, I have to leave it to Anand to work it out.
Let me put it like this. Anand respects and admires Nehru. He's clearly more circumspect, cautious, even guarded about Indira Gandhi. That's right, isn't it?
Well, you see, in the case of Nehru, he didn't have to know him, he didn't have to work with him. He knew him through his books and speeches and the personality that really impressed him. He knows so much about Nehru, but he doesn't know Nehru.
Indira he knew personally.
Indira ji was closer, you see. He knew personally, to some extent, of the same age. There is an element of,
And because she was closer, the scales dropped from his eyes a little.
No, scales don't drop. The point is, at the same time, so much confusion comes from other sources. The people who say they are even closer to her, they give a different version.
But one thing is true. As author, you describe his feelings with the words that he was in a sense crushed by her. He considers himself a nominated chief minister with limited power created by her.
Well, he knows the fact that he is a nominated chief minister. Then the second question is, why did she nominate him? So he comes to some conclusions about the job that she is supposed to have expected him to do, and he goes about that job.
And does it.
suppose and does it or tries to do it,
Completely,
whatever.
and I agree with you, but he always has reservations, subtly expressed, about the fact he's nominated. He wished such nominations didn't have to happen in the system, doesn't he?
Well, the opinions about the nominated chief ministers, they were there galore. I mean, everybody was expressing all these things. On the other hand, he was trying to find a reason for it. He was one of the few people who was trying to find the reason for it. He called the other chief ministers very good status quo chief ministers.
He wanted to be a man for change.
That's right. So if she wants you to do something which changes the society, and if it doesn't change, then the society will simply disintegrate, as happened after
Hence
1967.
hence the need for nominated chief ministers.
Therefore, if she thinks that the chief ministers who are very good status quo chief ministers suddenly are asked to do something which they have never done, never thought of doing, then is it fair?
I accept that, and that's a good justification for what she was in the process trying to do.
Yes.
But let me put something to you as my last question. You're a congressman, you're a former prime minister. Your book raises certain fundamental questions
Yes.
about Indira Gandhi's style in office,
Yes.
her motivation in office,
Yes.
and it raises certain questions about the sort of prime minister she was.
And the questions that were actually raised in her time.
But by raising
way,
them, you're giving them a certain elevated position.
No, I am not elevating anything. I am only bringing out situations which I knew about, and perhaps in course of time other people have forgotten, or the next generation doesn't know about it.
So you're again...
They should know that all this agony we have passed through already, and they will pass through tomorrow. Tomorrow, if there is a change from socialism, as we understood, to liberalization, is it a smooth change? It's a very difficult change, but how it was brought about, you will know only when you come to that time.
Mr. Rao, once again, in writing about Indira as you have, you are opening our eyes in case we have begun to forget. Isn't that what you're doing?
It is not for you. You see, the evaluation process has taken a rather oversimplification, a kind of line of oversimplification.
You're restoring the complexity and richness.
I am telling them that nothing is so simple as you have been thinking. You are in the habit of looking at white and black. Nothing is white and black in life. It is all predominantly grey, in so many shades of grey. Now it is for the coming generations to bring to bear a much clearer judgment to the achievements or the failures of our own leaders. That's very necessary.
Did it take courage to attempt to re-evaluate Indira Gandhi in today's climate? I won't say any more than that.
No, to me, I think there is nothing to intimidate me. I'm always a person who expresses what he feels, and I haven't given all the details, but I did so when Indiraji was there also. But it was never misunderstood for a long time, and for some time they thought there is something, but then they found that this man has the core of honesty about him.
And that's what they appreciated.
I think so.
Mr. Rao, for speaking so openly, and if I may add, not always in code, thank you very much for this wonderful interview.
Yeah.
That's it for this week. In Focus will be back next week with another interviewee, but for today, from P.V. Narasimha Rao's residence in Motilal Nehru Marg, New Delhi, goodbye.